So here we are at the Sustainability and Circular Economy Theatre, and we've just been listening to a panel discussion and presentations largely around a project in London, but about modern methods of construction, and delighted to have trapped Matthew Teague, our senior architect, after the panel discussion. And Matthew, great seminar, lots of interesting stuff in there, and lots of partners we already work with, but I've just literally been speaking to one of our customers from National Tube stockholders about the pressures on him as a sort of an intermediary between steel making and the end customer. And now, of course, coming to you and you guys who are very, very close to that sharp end of construction and talking about some of these modern methods of construction, things are changing quite rapidly at your end of the field, aren't they? Tell us what's going on.
Well, there's definitely more of a move towards looking at buildings as kits of parts.
Right.
Rather than individual projects. So the building we were talking about, the Forge, which is on the South Bank, just behind Tate Modern, is probably one of the first out of the box, really, which is, commercially viable, not a demonstration project.
Yeah.
And it's mainly down to the determination of the client, Land Securities, who commissioned it. And it comes out of a piece of work we were doing previously to that with Bryden Wood, who are probably one of the major kind of protagonists of this particular movement, platform construction. They were doing work for the Ministry of Justice.
Right.
So it's really a long-term being embedded with if you like, a supplier, a consultant in this case, and actually being in on the conversation from very, very early doors until now, actually nearly a completed building.
And I think people will be fascinated to hear about this idea of building out of a box of parts, and they might be thinking kind of porter cabin sized buildings, but I'm guessing this is a serious sized construction, is it?
Yeah, this is nine stories, 2 buildings, both commercial offices, but we at the beginning of the project it was nearly laboratories for one of the universities.
Yeah.
So the key takeaway from this is the building is capable of being used in many different sectors. It's got a standard grid. It's pretty adaptable inside because the column spacing lends itself to that.
Yeah.
So we can look at many sectors with one building type. Or if for instance you need a longer span building, we tweak the design.
Yeah.
The key point for us is that it's mainly using standard products, stuff we already make,
Right.
or could change, with relatively simple changes to make more appropriate for the use. We are looking at the potential to do some new thinking around products for this particular market. But at the moment, everything we supply or have supplied into that building is completely standard. It's just being used in a slightly different, perhaps a more thoughtful way.
Yeah. And I guess people will understand sort of from a flexibility of design concept, understandable as a pack of parts, but from a sustainability perspective, what makes this better than traditional methods?
Well, first off, we use less. So there's less steel in it. This is actually quite a hard sell internally.
Yeah.
So there's less of it. Comfloor typically would be a whole floor plate. In this, it's just a beam that stitches the floor plate together between columns. So we worked out probably about 10 times less Comfloor on this building than we would in a traditional steel frame. So that's interesting from the point of view of the company. So if we're just going to produce the standard Comfloor profile, then there's little value in it. So that again suggests we need to innovate in that space. The steel frame, it's a very efficient steel frame. It's tube. So it's an entirely tubular frame, apart from one or two bits. Yeah. Because of the nature of that, it's using less steel.
Yeah.
But the upside is because most of the connections are bolted, it's potentially disassemblables. If we could take the whole thing down, we could use it again if we wanted to. So there are benefits, particularly if we look at circular economy and reuse, module D and circular economy. We begin to sort of make sense of all of this, which really adds value to what we can bring.
And has any of this project been sort of off-site construction? Because that's another buzzword in the construction industry, where they're saying, look, we'd rather not do everything on a dirty, wet building site. We'd rather build it off-site and bring it to site. Is the Forge using that sort of methodology?
So the majority of the structure was done by a company called Dam Structures, who are now part of Severfield, but that was all I was going to say traditionally fabricated, but actually it's more like an assembly. So it's not traditional fabrication in that sense. Bits come to site as sort of pre-assembled modules or panels. So that's off-site.
Yeah.
A lot of the other individual components were assembled off-site and then brought to site as stacks, ready to be lifted in. In terms of the actual building of the building, that was very much systematic. Part of the reason for that is the site's very, very tight.
Yeah.
So that the decision was made that the majority of the structure would have to come in smaller parts.
Right.
We could have lifted in whole sections if it'd been a greenfield site, then I think it would have been built slightly differently.
Yeah. And one of the other things I notice in our industry, and you and I have been around a long time, but maybe more than ever before, this spirit of collaboration from Tata Steel with other organisations seems to be greater than ever before. And you were on a panel there with Bryden as one example of a company that you mentioned. You said we've been working on this for a long time with them. How are those sort of through supply chain relationships developing from your personal experience?
We're seeing more and more of it. We've got several long-term partners in construction, the same way we have long-term partners in automotive. The key difference, I guess, for us is that tends to be more at the specifier client end than the original equipment manufacturer, if you like. So rather than talking to a Toyota, we'd be talking to Toyota's designers, if you like, the concept guys, which is probably the right end at the moment for construction, because one of the features of this platform design is that actually a little bit of power is being taken away from the contractor.
Right, okay.
So contractors become assemblers of parts rather than problem solvers.
Yeah.
Problems have already been solved. And that's where us as a manufacturer actually comes in. And if we can have more structured conversations with the clients and the designers and solve the problems before they hit site, so that could be working out how to put something together or coming up with a new product or a new way of doing something. That's the spirit of collaboration where we are now. I think the potential is for us actually to move further down the supply chain, further downstream, and do more in this space and add more value.
And do you think there's the appetite from architects and designers for that collaboration with people quite far upstream as we would be as Tata Steel as a component manufacturer?
Yeah, I think that absolutely there is. Whether this is right or not, they see us as a sort of permanent part of the landscape. Certainly part of the construction landscape. We've been around. We do have a reputation in the industry for being, pretty reliable. Probably most reliable than a lot of suppliers. We have a reputation for being innovative as well.
Yeah, sure.
So we're playing on all of the things that we've used for years in automotive. We're just getting a bit more kind of good at it in construction.
And it's interesting, you mentioned it a couple of times in our chat now, and I think you mentioned it in your presentation earlier about the comparison with the automotive sector, and you're saying construction is becoming more like the automotive sector. What do you mean by that?
I mean we're looking more at platforms and the fact that buildings can be systemised, they can be kits of parts. So we don't, every time a building gets designed, we need to stop looking at it as a prototype. It's not. It can be part of a. So if I go to Peugeot for a car, I might be driving the same chassis. Well, I will be driving the same chassis as another model. Why don't we look at buildings in the same way? It simplifies everything. The major resistance is from architects who see it as taking away their creativity, and one of the challenges is actually to say, what gives you more time to concentrate on the things that matter. You're dealing less and less with the sort of literal nuts and bolts. You don't need to worry about that because that'll work. But facade, you can have a play with the facade, the plan. All of the stuff which architects are actually employed to do, let's face it, is now a thing they can spend the time on.
Yeah, and it's interesting, people might say, why don't Tata Steel stick to steel? Why do they need to go down this route of getting involved in some of this stuff? But actually that's where the value is, isn't it? And I look at our construction sector at the moment is the most valuable part of our order book. And I guess the very fact that we've got someone in our organisation with the job title architect says something about our ambition, doesn't it?
It does. Not sure if I'm going to remain job title architect very long. It's very much a self-imposed job title, I'm going to say.
But in terms of credibility in the construction organisation, they're saying there's someone from Tata Steel who's an architect, says something about our ambition.
Yeah, it's important to say. I mean, it's a long. I joined in 2000, so it was recognised when the construction centre was running that we needed a range of the professions. We're an engineering-heavy organisation.
Yeah.
Why not look at an element of design? And I think you're right. It does open a few doors.
Yeah. And there seem to be a few things going on in construction. I'm going to keep going because it's so interesting. But there's a lot of things going on in the construction sphere. It wasn't that long ago since we were at Grand Designs exhibition and Catnic Matrix were there. So a similar sort of off-site modular construction thing. We've got the seismic building demonstrator in Watford. How do all these things come together as sort of a common offering, if you like?
It's all part of the same story, but it's looking specifically, I guess, at different sectors. So Matrix, if you like, suits a smaller building, possibly self-build. I mean, there's a massive market there, I would suggest, in residential for things like Matrix. Seismic is specifically aimed at the Department for Education, but it doesn't have to be. I mean, it could do a number of things. I would particularly like to look at seismic for resi. Watch this space, I guess. And then Platform 2, which is what the Forge is actually made out of, that's the name of the system, is capable of many sectors. It could be a hospital, it could be a school, it could be an office, it could be residential. I mean, it's a very flexible building type. The thing that underpins all of them is that they are kits of parts, they're disassemblable, so they're potentially reusable.
Yeah.
It's a great sort of circular economy story in there as well. And for us, it's all about adding value because we're no longer just commodity manufacturers. We don't just bung it out of the door in the form of a coil. We're actually doing some really quite interesting things with it.
Yeah. And my last question to you, Matthew, sorry for keeping you longer. I know you've got lots of other things to do, but when you talk to the construction industry, especially the sort of the architects and the designers and so forth, when they talk about sustainability, is their focus more on the construction methods and the redesign or the reuse of a building, or are they looking at the sort of materials upstream and saying, well, it doesn't matter how you design it, if the steel going into it is still high carbon, we've got to choose something else? Where's their priorities?
Embodied carbon, probably at the minute.
Embodied carbon.
Yeah. So the question we get asked the most is, can I buy green steel, or sort of how many tons of CO2 in this, which is why the emphasis on materials efficiency from our point of view at the moment is really, really important. Yeah. And it is things like lightweighting frames where possible, using materials in the appropriate way. Reuse is a really, really interesting point of discussion in the industry at the moment. Is how and it offers up some significant questions for us as a supplier. Could we take back the material we make? If we did take it back, what would we do with it? How do we know it's our material? How do we mark stuff? Is there a and all of this is being worked on. Yeah. But I think the future is actually really, really exciting because there are so many. All of these questions need answering, and we're doing lots of decarbonisation and stuff. But there are some those things we can do now, which are about how do you design buildings, how do you reuse buildings, how do you look at what does end of life mean. Lots of really kind of interesting, crunchy questions for the profession.
Listen, Matthew, thanks ever so much for spending so much time with us. I know I asked you more questions than I was going to, but it's a fascinating topic, and this interesting about how we share information, experience between market sectors. The difference between the pressure that the Talbot Steelworks will feel to decarbonise compared to the priorities of the architects or the far end of the product. The whole idea of reuse and recycle and bringing stuff back is fascinating. There's so much in there, and I said at the beginning how fast things are changing now, but I've got a horrible feeling they might be changing even faster going forward.
It's going to accelerate.
Yeah. Listen, thanks again for your time, Matthew. It was really helpful. Thank you.